video, I'm going to be preparing a slow cooker beef pot roast. It's prepared with new potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, pearl onions, and it's a great recipe because you can do all the prep work the night before, and then in the morning you put it on the slow cooker, you set it on low, you just leave and go to work. When you come home, there's about an hour left, and
so one of the first steps we have is prepping our potatoes. I have about a pound and a half of new potatoes, and all I'm going to do is put them in a bowl, and then I'm going to take that and fill it with water. You got these all in there. We're just going to soak them for a little bit, so any dirt that's left in there will be removed. So we're going to take that and we're going to put it under the water and fill it with water. So while our potatoes are soaking in water, we're going to cut and clean our pearl onions. One bag is enough. You can get them for about $3 or so at the supermarket, and we're just going to clean these off. Pearl onions are relatively simple to clean. You just snip off one end and the other end, and then peel off one layer of the skin. It can be a little tricky if if you haven't done it before, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. And I can see I need to take one more layer off this one, I think. That'll make it real easy to peel. We got that one off, and then that removes, and there we go. So that's one. We're going to do the whole batch and then move on to the carrots. So now that the onions are cleaned and cut, we're going to move on to the carrots. I've already peeled them. You want to cut them in half, like that, and then in half again, like that, and then once they're halved, I like to cut them in half like that. It makes it easier to handle. And then sometimes if they're really thick carrots like these, I'll chop them up again, like that. And these we're going to use also under the meat so that it's really nice and ready to go. So that's the carrots. Okay, so the carrots are done. I've washed off some cremini mushrooms, and the big ones I'm going to quarter just because they're so big. Okay, so the first time I made this, the recipe did not call for garlic, so I didn't put any. The second time I cut it up and put it in, and that worked a little better, but I'm hoping to get a little more flavor this time by smashing the garlic and then putting it in the pot that way, so that hopefully the flavor can spread. I just turn the knife on side, and then with the palm of my hand force the knife down and smashes up the garlic like that. So now we are done with the garlic. One more step that's not in the recipe, it involves potatoes. The new potatoes, the recipe said to put in whole. The first time I made it, I put the potatoes in whole, and they really didn't absorb any salt or flavor from the liquid in the slow cooker. So what I've done since then is cut them in half, and they have taken out a little bit more salt from the liquid in the slow cooker, so that's helped as well. So yeah, we cut these all up in half, and you can see them, all of them are all cut. Okay, now we've come to the point where we have to season the meat. It has to be seasoned on both sides with salt and pepper. So we'll start with the pepper, and I like to put the meat on top of a piece of wax paper because we do have to season it on both sides. And once I've dried my hands from washing them after I put the meat down, I don't like to have to get them, covered in meat juice again. So we're just going to take a little salt, and actually I like to season it heavily because it's going to sit in that slow cooker a long time. So now it's really easy to flip the meat over. You just pick it up, take the plate, turn it over, and then turn the meat back over on itself. Peel off the wax paper, And now you throw that out. And then you go ahead and you season the other side. And I like fresh cracked pepper. It gives me a little bit better flavor than just putting pre-ground pepper that you buy in the store. And then we salt this side as well. A little more salt there, and just sprinkle it evenly over the meat. Now, all of this will sit overnight, and the salt will get soaked into the meat. Okay, so it's the following morning, and we're going to get our crock pot ready to hold all the stuff that we have, and get the meat in there and get it started cooking, because it takes 8 hours. So we're going to drain all the water from the potatoes. Actually, another step that I hadn't mentioned was I added a little salt water that I soaked the potatoes in, because as I had previously mentioned, the potatoes don't absorb too much salt when they cook. So we put them in I put them in a little container here and soaked them in salt water all night. And then I've got the pearl onions and the mushrooms and the carrots in another container, which we're going to put in there too. And then put that off to the side now. And we're going to just mix this stuff up a little bit in the crock pot so that it gets a nice mixture and it's a nice base for our meat. So now the next step that we have involves preparing the cornstarch and water that we put in the base of the, and it says you take 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and I just like to use the top here, and then 2 tablespoons of water. I'll do that real quick. Now, one of the rules I use typically when I cook is a rule that my mother taught me a long time ago. She said, whenever you make a recipe for the first time, always follow it to the letter. Because if you follow it exactly and it turns out lousy, then you can blame the recipe. If you start messing around with it and it turns out to be lousy, then you don't know if it was what you did or if it was the recipe itself. So the first time I made this, as I've said a couple times now, I followed the recipe exactly, and while it was good, it wasn't as good as I thought it could be. So I've added a couple things to it. I've changed up some of the methods. So we're just going to go ahead and pour this cornstarch down into the bottom of the crock pot, and that's going to sit there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the meat in the pot. But first, I'm going to season the vegetables in the slow cooker, just a little more salt and pepper. And then this is where I kind of go off the reservation with the recipe. The original recipe says just put the cornstarch and the water in there, and that should do it. Now, my personal feeling is that I'm not going to get enough juice from that, so I have altered it by adding some beef stock. Just, maybe a good cup of the beef stock in there. And then also, whenever you braise something, you can't go wrong with a little red wine or some sherry. So I'm going to put a little sherry in there too, to give it a little bit of a flavor. And then we take our meat, which has been sitting all night long in the fridge, covered in foil and plastic wrap, so it doesn't take on any flavors from anything else in the fridge. Oh, we forgot to add the garlic. Hold on 1 second. I've got my garlic here, which also, incidentally, isn't in the recipe, and I've modified it a couple times since we started. I'm going to put that right in on top of the vegetables here, a lot of it, most of it. And then just to make sure that the meat gets some good flavoring, once we put the meat in on top, which we're going to do right now, we just slide the roast right off the plate into the slow cooker, just like that. And this all goes in the trash. We'll move that out of the way and wash that too. Now we got our meat in our slow cooker. The recipe also calls for 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire. So we are going to put 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire right over the top of the roast. And one more here. And then again, I modify a little bit because I like Worcestershire and I want to make sure the meat is all covered. So that's done. And then the final step that I'm altering with this recipe is I'm going to place some of the pieces of garlic right on top of the meat so that it can absorb a little bit in the cooking process and flavor the meat a little bit more. So now we have got our roast in the crock pot ready to go. All we do now is set the lid on top and adjust the temperature to on, and we want to go low cook. So we're right about ready to walk away from this. The original recipe, like I say, I follow it almost to the exact, but it recommends 3 hours on high for the meat to cook in the slow cooker. I choose to not use the high setting. I like the low setting. I think that it gives the meat more time to cook at a lower temperature, and it stays juicier and more tender in that slow and low process. And also, I choose many times not to use the timer on the crock pot. I use my own. So we're going to set this timer for 8 hours, and by the time I get home, it should be ready for the last little bit of work that we have to do. All right, so the meat is in the slow cooker. It's set on low. We've got about 8 hours to go. I'm ready to take off and go to work. When I come home around 5 or 5:30, there'll be a little bit left to do. We've got to take off the lid, put in some fresh herbs right on top, some rosemary, some thyme. Switch it from low to high. Let it go on high for an hour, and after that hour, it'll be done. We'll remove the meat from the pan. We'll cut it into nice chunks, or we can tear it apart, pull it, and serve it as a sandwich on a French baguette, or you can serve it just as it is, the meat just as it is, with some of the pan vegetables and some of the juice that goes along with it. It's really, really a tasty and delicious recipe. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope the simplicity of this encourages you to try it at home. I know it's a really simple thing. You do everything the night before. You toss it in the pot, you turn it on, and you go to work, you come home, and you get dinner. So I hope you all enjoyed this. Thanks so much.